Imagine this. You've been grinding for 10 years. You've skipped the expensive vacations. You're driving a car that's 8 years old and you've finally done it. You look at your brokerage account and there it is, $450,000. For the first time in your life, you feel safe. You feel like you've arrived. So you decide it's finally time to breathe. You buy the slightly nicer SUV. You finally renovate the kitchen. You stop checking your budget every Friday because, hey, you've got nearly $500,000. You're in the home stretch. But then 5 years later, you realize something terrifying. Your net worth hasn't moved. In fact, adjusted for inflation, you're actually poorer than you were when you hit that milestone. You fell into the trap. You're part of the 90% who get to the 1-yard line and then for some reason just drop the ball. My name is John and I spend way too much time thinking about the psychology of wealth and why smart people make devastating financial mistakes. If you're someone who feels like you're working harder than ever but your bank account is hitting a glass ceiling, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Look, here's the thing. Most financial advice is geared toward the beginner. We talk about the first $1,000 or how to save your first 10K. And that's great, but there is a much more dangerous phenomenon that happens once you actually start winning. I call it the 90% wealth trap. It's the psychological and mathematical phenomenon where the closer you get to true never work again financial freedom, the more likely you are to self-sabotage. Now you might be thinking, John, if I had $900,000, there's no way I'd mess that up. But the data says otherwise. According to the Federal Reserve's survey of consumer finances, there is a massive cluster of households in the upper middle class that hit a net worth plateau and never actually break into the top 1% or even the top 5%. They get comfortable, and comfort is the silent killer of a legacy. We've been told that wealth building is a linear path. You save a little, it grows a little. You save more, it grows more. That's actually not how it works at all. Wealth building is back-heavy. It's an S-curve. Here's what most people don't realize. The final 10% of your effort, that last little push, is actually responsible for about 50% of your lifetime results. Think about a plane taking off. It uses 25% of its entire fuel supply just to get off the runway and reach cruising altitude. If the pilot decides to cut the engines when they're 90% of the way to the desired altitude because it's high enough, the plane doesn't just stay there, it stalls. It crashes. Most of you are cutting your engines at 30,000 feet when the goal was 35,000, and you don't realize that the thin air at the top is where the efficiency actually happens. John, let's look at some real math, because numbers don't have emotions. Let's say your goal is $1 million. That's the finish line for your initial wealth phase. If you invest $2,000 a month at a 7% return, it takes you roughly 9 years to hit your first $300,000. That's the hard part. That's the slog. But to go from $900,000 to that $1,000 goal, at that same 7% return, your money is now making $63,000 a year just by existing. You only need to wait about 18 months to gain that final $100,000. This is where it gets really interesting. The person who falls into the 90% trap sees that $900,000 and thinks, I'm rich, I can afford the $80,000 Porsche now. What they don't see is that by removing that $80,000 or stopping their contributions at the 90% mark, they aren't just losing $80K, they are cutting the compounding tail off their life. Over the next 10 years, that $100,000 they didn't finish, or the $80,000 they spent on a depreciating asset, would have turned into another $200,000. By quitting at 90%, you aren't losing 10% of your results, you're likely losing 30 to 40% of your ultimate potential wealth. So why do we do it? Why do we get so close and then start buying stuff we don't need? It's called relative deprivation mixed with a bit of a rival fallacy. When you're broke, you compare yourself to people who have $10,000. When you have $100,000, you compare yourself to people with $500,000. But when you hit $900,000, you start looking at the people with $5 million. You feel like you've worked hard enough to deserve the lifestyle of the person at the next level. You're tired. You've been disciplined for a decade. Your brain is literally screaming for a hit of dopamine to reward all that delayed gratification. Look, I get it. Discipline is exhausting. It's like holding a heavy weight above your head. At the beginning, you're motivated. In the middle, you're determined. But right at the end, your muscles are screaming. That's when most people drop the weight. They don't drop it because they're weak. They drop it because they think the floor is close enough that it won't break. But in finance, if you drop the weight at the 90% mark, it lands on your toes. There's another layer to this. I call it the middle-class mirror. Most of your friends, family, and coworkers are likely stuck in the standard lifestyle. If you have $500,000 in the bank, you are already doing better than 90% of the population. When you look in the mirror of society, you see a success. Your neighbors see your old car and your modest house, and they think you're doing okay, but in your head you know you're wealthy. The trap is wanting the outside to match the inside. You want the mirror to reflect the $900,000, so you start upgrading. You buy the success starter pack, the watch, the car, the club membership. Here's what most people don't realize. The moment you start trying to look like your net worth stops growing. True wealth is the money you don't spend. It's the stuff you don't see. The 90% trap is essentially a crisis of identity. Are you a wealth builder or are you a big spender? Most people find out at the 90% mark that they were just a big spender who was waiting for enough permission to start. So how do you make sure you don't become a statistic? How do you push through that final, most difficult 10%? Step 1. Define the mechanical finish line. Stop using feelings to manage your money. You need a hard number where the math says you are done. Not I feel rich, but the 4% rule says I can live on this forever. Until you hit that number, you are in the war zone. In the war zone, you don't buy trophies, you stay focused. Step 2, the reward buffer rule. Now you might be thinking, John, I can't just live like a monk forever. I agree. Here's the rule. You can only lifestyle creep using 10% of your gains, not your principal. If your portfolio grows by $100,000 this year, you can spend $10,000 on something fun. The other $90,000 stays in the engine. This allows you to breathe without stalling the plane. Step 3, increase automation as you get closer. The more safe you feel, the less you should trust yourself. When you hit the 90% mark, your brain will try to convince you to skip a month of investing. Don't let it. Set your contributions to nuclear option levels of automation so you don't even have the choice to self-sabotage. Step 4, change your peer group. This sounds harsh, but if you're the wealthiest person in your circle, you're going to fall into the 90% trap. Why? Because you'll feel like you've already won. You need to find a community of people who are at the 200% or 500% mark, not to compete with them, but to realize that your 90% is actually just the beginning of a much larger game. I want to tell you a quick story. Two friends, Dave and Sarah, both started with nothing. Both hit $900,000 by age 50. Dave looked at the $900K and said, I've done it. I'm going to retire early-ish, buy a boat and just coast. He stopped contributing and started spending his dividends. 10 years later, Dave has $950,000. He's fine, but he's worried about inflation, and he can't really afford to do much. Sarah hit $900,000 and said, I am at the peak of my compounding power. This is the most important part of the race. She stayed disciplined for just 3 more years. In those 3 years, her contributions and the compounding growth pushed her to $1.2 million. That extra $300,000, that final 10% effort, doubled her safe withdrawal rate for the rest of her life. Dave is surviving, Sarah is building a legacy. The difference was only 36 months of discipline at the very end. Look, finishing is hard. That's why it's called the finish line. It's the part of the race where your lungs burn the most. But I'm telling you, the view from the other side of that 100% mark is completely different. When you reach true financial independence, where your assets cover your lifestyle with a massive margin of safety, the stress that has been sitting on your shoulders for 20 years finally evaporates. Don't trade a lifetime of true freedom for a few years of feeling comfortable. Don't let a nicer car or a renovated kitchen steal your legacy. You are closer than you have ever been. Don't drop the weight now. If you're currently in that middle stage grind, or if you've hit a plateau, drop a comment below and tell me, what is the 190% trap luxury that is tempting you right now? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you want to know the exact order you should be investing your money to make sure you hit that finish line as fast as possible, watch this video right here. I'll see you in the next one.